Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Knock and Talk podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Professor D, and
I'm your other host, Anchi. So today we're going to have a little bit of a different episode. We're basically having discussion, trying to kind of brainstorm our thoughts on a new topic. We're talking about rooms and shelter. We're trying to theorize and kind of speculate in kind of a philosophical way. But you'll see how this unfolds. But just to start off over here, when you look at somebody's room, you can kind of tell some things about them. Of course, you don't know exactly what type of person they are, but I've been thinking about this, and I think you can it's kind of a window into their conscientiousness. So that's one of the big five personality traits in psychology, right? And I was thinking, in particular, the facets orderliness, right? Obviously, self-discipline and dutifulness. So I don't know. We can discuss that. That's just what I think as my starting thoughts. When you look at somebody's room or their collections of rooms, right, in their shelter or home, um, it's kind of like it's a very different experience than observing that person's direct behavior, because when you're with somebody for, like, let's say an hour, you have kind of a limited window into their behavior. But if you look at somebody's room or house, right, you can see um, accumulated information, quote unquote, right, from years or many months, and that can give you a lot of information on that person, what they like and
in
dislike.
addition, I wanted to add that no matter what person you're with, you're always going to confront some kind of social anxieties, and that's always going to stop a person from really expressing what they want to express about their identity, right? Because they feel there might be some consequences and they want to avoid it. There's always some kind of aversions, whether that we're always faced with in
True.
social settings. But the home, that's really the most intimate and most comfortable space that we can find ourselves in. Like the shelter, it doesn't get any more intimate and comfortable than that for a person. And that is where really the person is most likely, most of the time, is expressing the most about their identity through the objects and arrangements of objects in their house. And it comes down to, like, whenever you go into a house, anything that you can point out can be categorized into two things. All right, it could be tools or objects of identity expression, or tools and objects of utility, and they're not mutually exclusive. But I mean, we can agree, Andrew, we can agree that the home is, just simply put, the place of refuge, right?
Yes. Based on those, like, you know how you're talking about these two kind of objects or tools.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of building off that, I was thinking, if we're going into classification, right? If you want to classify rooms or like individually, right? You can look at it as, well. These are the four things you can do in a room, right? So things done in rooms could be split into exercise, sleep, recreation, and creation. And creation would also be productivity. So recreation is leisure, and creation and production would be like work. Like, even if you're working on things that, like, for yourself, like a hobby, that'll be classified there. So I was thinking, if we have four kind of dimensions, you can kind of classify rooms in that way.
See, I had three dimensions. I had comfort, recovery, and safety or security. But productivity, I think your labeling is better. Could
Wait,
you repeat that?
but
I actually wanted to
yeah,
take note of it.
yeah, I will repeat that. But that's actually really interesting, because if we look at how we both, because we weren't talking, we individually tried to classify, right, and now we're discussing together. But that's interesting, because if you look at mine, they're based on what you do, but your categories are based on how the person's feeling in that room.
Right. Well, I mean, that's really what I wanted to kind of address is how do we interpret the concept of a house? Also, I wanted to add that, well, I should have added this. I should have said this in the beginning, but I think that shelter can really be its own philosophical study, since we can determine that it's really shelter, an essential need for humans, that, and we can see this pattern throughout all of human history, that shelter is something constant. So, but really, it's the meat of the study of the shelter would be placed on identity. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory why we need it for something like survival, right? But to go further into how it relates to identity, we have to first determine components. One, when it's shelter, it's obvious that there is an outside and inside quote unquote world. So we'll call it home and non-home for the sake of simplicity. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So we know that the person, inevitably is inflicted with different consequences and conflicts in their as they exist, as they experience the world, all both the inside and outside worlds, right? But compared to the outside world or the non-home, the home environment is relatively uh, more secure, more it has more comforts. It's able to cater more to the person, to all their wants and needs. Well, not all their wants and needs. Let's call it more modest wants and needs because you can't drive around like an expensive car around the house, for example, but more I guess like sensory comfort. Um, But as I'll go further in, you'll see that's not necessarily sensory comfort, but more conceptual comfort too. So that being stated, the importance of the outside world helps affirm the identity of the inside world, the home environment, right? And like the differences between the two environments, right, is what gives the other one the identity. So the the expression of the non-home environment in the home environment is what gives the home environment the identity. Should I elaborate?
I could see that. Like you're saying, since one exists, it.
And I'll give a perfect example.
Okay.
Um, Windows. Why do we include windows? Can you imagine a house without any windows? And yeah, so it'll have doors, but those doors have no windows too. It would be very strange, right?
Yeah.
So what the window does, it lets us see into the outside environment, and it lets in daylight. It it tells the person inside a house of the existence of the non-home environment, right? And in one sense experience, we can interpret, understand, and are able to differentiate the two environments and how their differences present themselves to give one another the sense of identity. And the perfect example, I guess, this is a perfect example of, or I guess, an abstraction of the white spot on the black canvas that I think we mentioned before in some of the previous episodes. That the white spot only gains its identity when it is surrounded by something that is not white, right?
Yeah.
Such as the
Yeah.
rest of the black color on the canvas.
Yeah. I can see that. That reminds me of when people are talking about morality, right? Like if no evil exists, then no good exists. It's kind of the same, right? Because you need something
Right,
to compare it to.
right.
Okay.
So that being said, so again, that is how we are able to appreciate both the home and the non-home environment. Um, but going in more into identity, not the identity of environments, but the identity of people, right? So we stated before that the shelter actually helps in affirming the identity of the owner or the controller of the house, where they feel most comfortable in.
Okay.
So we want the shelter in part to affirm our identities as it exists in home and non-home environments. So the identity expression would contain elements from the non-home, right? And the non-home experience would be kind of a domestication of the relatively chaotic non-home environment, right? So we might include just an example, our achievements that we have, our achievements of accomplished by the identity. No, not the identity, the person, right? The person in the non-home environment. For example, maybe they got some trophies from sporting events, right? And that would contribute to kind of a decoration, right? So a identity expression without utility because it's probably just something for display, and it would help affirm the identity of the person who's controlling the house, right? Who got that trophy from that sporting event. Um, does that? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I can see what you're saying. I agree, but that's interesting how you called the non-home environment chaotic, right? It's like it goes back to how we called the shelter a refuge, right? Because um, when people are at home, they want to feel comfortable. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
it's kind of like an escape or like a safe haven or something like that. So I like that idea because when you're outside, even when you're in your home, things are unpredictable. Like natural disasters can happen, or etc. Right? But
Right.
but
So
you
I
have
should
this
say
feeling.
relatively chaotic.
No, well, yeah, but no, I think you put it perfectly because we have this kind of illusion that when we're in our own home, we're safe. You know what I mean? That it gives us that
Hmm.
feeling of control and safety.
Right.
But really, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, and there's plenty of people who, get into accidents in the house and they even end up, getting injured or even dying.
Yes.
So there's still plenty of danger wherever you are, but because we were able to control more in the house, we feel safer because, the more control we have, the more secure we feel.
Right. I agree.
Oh, I wanted to go into this. So, if when you go into a house, it's not necessarily an expression of the identity. It could be an expression of identity that the controller or the owner desires to have. So, Anchi, I'm not sure if you remember, but we were touching upon the topic of the expression of the ideal identity in the room, right? In room that we feel most comfortable in.
Oh yeah.
Um, so I wanted to expand upon that throughout the house that it's not necessarily an expression of the identity. It can be an expression of the desired identity that the person that wants to be this type of person and into this state of being that they deem better. Um, right. So our identities or desired identity expression are pronounced the most through our shelter. So where we feel most comfortable with ourselves, right? So that is where we feel also the most comfortable in expressing the identity that we want to be. Because desiring to be someone is also subject to criticisms from or just some kind of negative consequences when we introduce it to kind of to social circle, right? When we talk to somebody about it, but where we feel most comfortable with in our houses, you would see that being pronounced, and so, but the same thing goes even if it's an expression of desired identity, you would really see the same categorization of objects in the house, object and tools being in the house, either for utility or that desired identity expression in this case.
All right. So yeah. Okay. So I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Um, definitely we'll think about this more and synthesize our thoughts more in the future. And maybe we'll come up with some kind of classification system or something like that.
Yeah,
But we'll
make
expand
it
on this
more
in the future.
organized.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. A philosophy of rooms, if you will. So, um, but yeah, so this could be the first conversation of many on this topic. We'll definitely return for a follow up episode, and we hope everybody enjoyed that.
And thank you for watching.